Hello, welcome to Soul Sessions with Deborah Barrett Maldonado and Dr. Rob Maldonado of Creative Mind. And we are here today in our relationship series talking about relationships this month.
Yeah, we talked about the mother last time.
Mm-hmm.
And did she ruin your life?
Did your mother ruin your life? We answered that question. And today we're going to talk about dear old dad because it's Father's Day month. So,
is it?
Yeah. And so we had to deal with father hunger in relationships. And I actually never heard this term before, so we're going to talk about father hunger. You had just mentioned it, and I found it very intriguing, and it kind of connected a lot of dots in my past of my relationship with men and my father. And so
yeah, in some of the literature it is tied to eating disorders.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
But of course we're coaches, or let's say we're talking about this as coaches in a coaching model, and particularly in a Jungian coaching model. So that gives us a perspective.
And when we talk about the father, we're going to talk about the father archetype and how that influences us, not just the personal father. So the burning question is, what is father hunger, Dr. Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory.
You want to eat your father? No.
No, that there's a dissatisfaction of not getting enough fathering because of death, abandonment, emotional unavailability, addiction, depression, any of those things that prevent that connection, that bond between the father and the child to form.
Also, if a lot of fathers work a lot, so that it might not be they're emotionally there, but they were there, but they weren't really in the household enough. They were working. My father, I found out later on that he worked 3 jobs to keep my mom home with us, and so he was I never saw him hardly when I was little because he was trying to make everything work. So that would be a creation of the hunger too. You miss that connection. You don't know. It's unfamiliar. Yeah,
and the way it plays out in long-term relationships, of course, is really interesting. So we're going to discuss that, and then how do we work with it? How do we approach it as coaches? Without kind of pathologizing it, because this is, let's say we look at family systems from the coaching perspective. We're not necessarily thinking about the extremes where there is abuse or really harsh problems, but just kind of the everyday general things that happen in families.
Yeah, I've had people who had fathers that were overbearing but loved them too much. They got too much attention from their fathers, that it was like the father adored them too much, and it was kind of like calm down, and the child felt like almost consumed by the love. So so it's not only just bad, like the father wasn't intent to do any harm, but sometimes that dynamic makes a pattern in someone's life. So one of the things that really touched me, you were a child psychologist for many, many years, and you were saying that the children were asking if you would love them. And I just thought that was so this precious little child, so we can get kind of sense of what that hunger is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a deep-rooted innate instinct in us to want to connect to both parents and other people in the family. I mean, the nuclear family is really a new phenomenon where you just have the 2 parents and the kids kind of growing up all isolated in a home. For the longest time, human beings were really raised in that village format where you had access to a lot of adults, not only your parents. And so when I was working with families, it was in the context of, let's say, the families that I would see had been in trouble with the Child Protective Services and those kind of things.
So the kid was withdrawn, the father was taken out of the family system?
Often, or absent, or there had been problems, and so the kids were really lost, especially the little ones, right? They felt like we don't know what's going on. We're afraid. And so when they would sit down, or I would sit down with the families and talk to the kids, and I would talk to the kids just like I would an adult, kind of ask them, how do you feel about these things? What's going on? Because often parents wouldn't do that to the kids, right? They think, we want to protect them from these things. But that's a mistake, because kids, you want to tell them what's going on as much as possible.
And you want them to talk about it.
Yes. And so I would ask them, how are you feeling and what's going on? And sometimes they would ask me, are you here to love me, right? To take care of me? And it's a natural part of our human nature, to want that connection.
And so even if we haven't had that extreme experience, we all have had a taste of it in some way. It's just showing this kind of tendency for children to look to the parent as a source of comfort and safety and security. And we always say that the projection of the father-mother archetype is very powerful, like divine. The child sees the parent as this like divine being that's, if you think about it, we see God in, like, those of you who, see God, they think, well, there's someone overlooking for us, like our Father. We even call God the Father in Christianity. And so that kind of idea that there's someone overlooking my needs and someone that's going to make everything okay. I think human beings have a tendency to want that. And so when we grow up and that person that was assigned to us that lets us down from that, we tend to want to look in the world. And as we grow up, especially, maybe you could talk about men, but for women, I've worked with so many single women, thousands of women across the world, different cultures, different environments. And a lot of what happens is that their hunger for the person, that one person, it's almost like to replace what the father didn't give them. And so like, well, I can't get it from you, so I need that hunger. And it becomes very almost needy in a way. And then the women that don't want to see themselves as needy have that ambivalence. They want that connection with the man, but then they also are afraid of it at the same time because it has so much power. And I know for me, I was always projecting the man is going to come save me. This guy is going to come save me on the white horse, and I won't be single anymore, and everything will be perfect in my life, putting that so much on another person. But then at the same time, when you give someone that much power, this idea of a person so much power, you also feel like a little hesitation of, well, if they're going to rescue me, then they're going to control me. And so there's that kind of conflict. And I see this a lot, especially with women who have their own careers and have basically set up themselves financially secure, and to like, now it gets mixed into, I want this father hunger but for the emotion, but not wanting to take away their power. So there's that conflict. And so it's 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And why isn't anyone committing to me? And that's why. How would you say it? Do you have anything to add about that? Or how would you say men react to the father hunger in relationships?
Well, we have to understand the unconscious content or the unconscious element in all this, that often we might be unconscious of that hunger.
Oh, yeah, I was, definitely.
Let's say we might think we've solved it or dealt with it because we've been successful in separating from the family and from the parents, or maybe we patched up our relationship as adults with our fathers and kind of feel, well, I'm okay now.
I'm complete with that.
Yeah, but a lot of that father hunger stays in the unconscious from our early experiences. And Jung would say, if you don't go back and open up the unconscious, the personal unconscious, the shadow, and really understand what were those early experiences that you experienced and what kind of message and imprint that they leave in you, then they play out in relationships. That's when they play out. So we can think of it this way. If we are unconscious of that, if we leave it in the unconscious and we never examine those early experiences, then there's a pretty good chance they're going to play out, and it will appear to us as if that's just bad luck or circumstances, right? That I end up playing out these patterns.
Or you don't even recognize there's a pattern. You just see there's no men out there. There's no one out there for me. There's not enough good people left.
And for men, it would be primarily that they don't have a role model, or because the father,
they don't know how to be a man.
Well, in a way, that's kind of harsh, but in a way, because you think, well, what function does the father play? And it's really the lawgiver, right? They're the ones that give you the sense of morality, of how do I act out there in the world. And if you don't have those role models, then you're kind of just trying to piece it all together with, different father images that you might have in your life.
For me, it was like an acknowledgement or like an approval from others. Like I got like you're good, or you're doing things right. That kind of idea that you're behaving, you're acting like a appropriate person. And when I was single and a guy would break up with me, I would think I did something wrong, and like kind of like I basically disappointed daddy. Basically, I disappointed this man because I didn't live up to his expectations of me, and that's a lot of pressure. And no wonder if you're single, you're thinking, why would I want to put myself in this position where someone is scrutinizing? Like for me, it was my father was very strict, so he was always nitpicking every little thing I was doing wrong. And so if that's my conditioning, why would I invite a man to live with me, to be like under a microscope saying, oh, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, and always feeling that you can never get acknowledgement or approval. And so that's the dynamic that played out for me, is that approval from men I was seeking. So that would be a father hunger, like a hunger for that approval, a hunger for them saying you're okay.
Yeah,
that you're loved in a way, like you're good as you are.
Absolutely. It is our relationship with authority. Not only the moral authority, like as in the church and God, but the social authority, that if we don't have a good solid understanding in ourselves of like that role model and somebody to emulate and admire, then we're always at odds, or we're ambivalent about our feelings about authority. And in relationships, it can play out right that way, that you're not, it's that phenomena they call in Jungian psychology the puer aeternus, the eternal boy or the eternal girl, the puella aeternus, where people remain kind of as children morally and emotionally. Maybe not intellectually, because society places so much emphasis on intellectual development.
But you're thinking like emotionally, they're still like a child?
Pretty much. Not that they're childish in a sense, but that when it comes to really being in touch with their emotions, there's still that kind of the presence of those early experiences. So
that makes a lot of sense, because when I was single, I would always put men on pedestals. I always tell our clients, don't put the man on a pedestal, because you're the daughter then. You kind of play that they become the authority in your life. And that idea of that stamp of approval, like I wrote in my book, Let Love In, is that you're looking for that stamp of approval. And that's kind of how I was like, when someone picks me, then I'm okay. And so you're giving your power to someone else to approve of you. And at the same time, and then it's like, why would you want it, but you don't want to give it up. So that again, that hesitation. And I want to say one more thing before we move on. I think that for me, I did a lot of personal growth, and the difference between Jung and some of the other stuff I did was because we kind of just examined forgive the parent. And it was a lot of projection on my father of, you're the one who disappointed me, you're the one who was too critical, you were the one who wasn't there for me, and I'm going to forgive that. But there was no acknowledgement of what role I played and my projection. And so I really didn't see my part of it until right before I met you. I realized that I was the one, how I responded to the way he was, and what I projected onto him was a part of my conditioning, but I chose that response. I chose to shut down, where my other sister would be more open and more willing to like be huggy with him and talk to him, and I'd be like, I'm not going to be rejected again. And so I played that out with every relationship, but it was my piece. And so we have to remember that we can't just like forgive the father because he was terrible or not living up to those expectations. And then when we examine it, what I realized, he wasn't a bad guy, but all this time I was like forgiving him and healing my wounds, my father wounds. And it was just a lot of kind of recycling of the same stuff. And I wasn't really getting a breakthrough. And until I realized what pattern how did I respond to this? And how can I change that response or be aware of how I am and what I'm projecting into the situation? So every relationship is a dynamic. It's that person is not static and you're just kind of reacting to that person. There's a dynamic that happens.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with the forgiveness model.
Yeah.
But it's kind of oversimplified because really, if you think about what we're meant to do organically in the family, yes, we're protected by the father. He serves as the lawgiver and the moral authority, but we're supposed to rebel against that. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's a natural process for us to break away from the kind of the realm of the father so that we become independent human beings and we're able to stand on our own. And so that process is disrupted when there's an absent father, either physically or emotionally.
So we have nothing to rebel against.
That's right. So we feel that hunger to want to connect with the father, but at the same time there's a need for our independence, like you were saying. And so in relationships, we're bringing that unfulfilled dynamic into the relationship, that we want to attach to this other person, but at the same time, our need to rebel and to establish our independence hasn't been played out yet. Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, that oversimplification, just forgive them, and they did wrong and you're okay. It's like understanding what's going on with you. Well, how did you rebel? What are you not able to do? And then now how do you move forward? How do you choose your way? Yeah. Now for men, they're looking, so let's say they had are they affected by an emotionally distant father?
Absolutely.
The same way a woman is, or differently?
Well, it's different because we play different roles in society, and the father would be more of a role model in that regard. Although he plays a role model for the woman as to what kind of man am I looking for, right? I want somebody, the woman might say, I want somebody who is like my father, at least, right, if they have that mature father who is able to love them, but also give them that enough freedom to become independent.
So what about boys that don't have a father figure growing up, and then they end up being like womanizers or just like kind of reckless with women? And is that the puer aeternus?
That would be part of that, kind of a father complex. And the father complex is simply this idea that there are these archetypes, like we spoke about with the mother, that we're projecting this archetype onto our biological father, and we're expecting him to be godlike in a sense. And that's that admiration and that kind of projection that takes place. But then we're also rebelling against that. We're saying, I have to find my own ground to stand on. And that process is just as important as the bonding.
Now, I think even now, and you know this from working with families, that family units are more complex now in the past 20, 30 years. So you have blended families, you have a stepfather, you have the father, you have the boyfriend, all these other people coming into the life, maybe even a big brother that from the first marriage coming in, affecting the children. And so there's a lot more things to not go wrong, but you know what I'm saying? There's there's an opportunity for more connection, or there's an opportunity for confusion of what role model am I going to follow? Because in the traditional family, you just follow.
That's right. There's always the grandparents, the grandfather,
Oh, yeah.
The uncles, the siblings, even older brothers, right? They serve in some respect as that function of getting that fathering, the mentoring, that guide from them.
I have one more question.
Yeah, but you know, in my experience, you also get it from teachers.
Oh, yeah.
Male teachers that you work with, professors that I worked with were very kind of father figures to me. So it's not just
Getting a job when you're a teenager and the boss like of that job.
yeah, or it's not as simple as, okay, if your father wasn't there for you, you're doomed and you're going to play these patterns out. No, it's not that way. It depends on your ability to access other father figures and to emulate them and to kind of think for yourself, here's somebody I admire, right? I'm going to mold myself after them, kind of model myself after them.
So here's the last question before we move on to how do we work with it. And it comes to me because I have a lot of friends that are gay and they're two women and they have children. How does the father, does one of them take the role of the father? It doesn't have to be like a male figure, but it could be a masculine figure, or how would that work?
Yeah, and here's where the Jungian model is a lot more inclusive because it gives us the larger perspective of, are we just biological beings or are we just social beings? Of course, we are those things, but we're also spiritual beings. Not spiritual, but not religious, right? Or not necessarily religious. What I mean is there are transcendent, transpersonal needs that need to be addressed as well. So what that means is that it doesn't matter what we're doing biologically, socially, as much as what is our internal understanding of our true selves? Have we done that internal work of self-inquiry? Who am I? What is my purpose? Those kind of questions lead us then to that deeper understanding of our true nature. And that there is where we encounter these archetypes. And they function to make us whole despite what's going on in our biology or our social situations.
So a woman, a female, would still have a father archetype in her unconscious.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. And that integration, meaning that kind of coming to terms with that internal structure of the archetype, is what gives us our wholeness. Not necessarily fixing the external relationships with our fathers.
Like I gotta be more like a dad, and let's go play some ball. And
that's right.
Okay. And so how do we work with the father archetype? So for me, it was really becoming aware of my own projection, and then also my expectations of a man and my father, and then my own like pattern of response to those, that stimulus that I projected and assumed was there.
Yeah, it's useful because as we work with people, with our clients and our students, we help them see that in their particular story, in their narrative of their personal history with their fathers or their lack of fathers, whatever the situation is the key to their freedom. Because it's the key to understanding what is going on internally in their relationship with the father archetype. And in approaching
so it's an internal relationship that's projected onto the father image in the world, but we have to kind of go inward to see our own father archetypal image.
Yes, because remember that the external situation is a reflection of the internal structure, of the internal psyche, we can say. So when we look at the family structure that we grew up in, and we kind of look at what narrative did I create for me personally from that experience, that narrative contains the seed of the archetypal element in us. And so it gives us an entry point into it. Now, it's not the complete story, obviously, because if we just go by the narrative of what happened to me, then we get stuck there. We just repeat those patterns.
Because we feel like we can't change the past, so we're stuck with this past.
That's right. Or we simply project it outward and say that we either reject it or we say, I'm just going to emulate it, right? If it was a positive experience, a positive narrative, we just repeat it and pass it on. But if we understand that, okay, that narrative is simply pointing to a deeper element in my spiritual journey, in my individuation process, then it gives us a key to that transformation.
And so I love this idea of the father archetype. Another way to think about it is that divine, the God image. And when we're little kids, we do see our fathers as gods. And then we're out there in romantic relationships. And when we fall in love, it feels like we're encountering the divine with that other person. Like think about it, when you get infatuated and you have a crush on someone, you're just like, they're the best, and you can't stop thinking about them, and you can't wait to be with them, and you're hanging on, like, especially when you first meet, are they going to text me? And you get that rush, and it appears that this other person is giving you some kind of stimulus, that this other person is lifting you up or loving you or approving you, but you're only seeing your own reflection. So if you can feel those feelings to someone else, that means that it's in you already. So that's a good sign. But when it's ambivalent, when it's like the attention is hot and cold, then you have to look at, well, where is that happening inside of me? And my own relationship with my deeper divine self, my own inner God, I guess we'd call it, like our own acceptance of that power.
Yeah. And if you look at society, we know the institutions, the religious institutions have kind of fallen apart. They're still there, obviously, and they continue to act as institutions. But so many of us have lost that faith and that contact, that kind of the ritual structure that they would give us to enact a lot of this process. And so people kind of are on their own now because there is no structure for individuation in that ritualistic institutional way. Now we need to depend on that inner journey of psychology, philosophy, mythology to guide us on that internal journey.
And so what would we have to do to do that? I mean, that's a big that's a big concept that you just said. We have to kind of explore. And I think, for me, and then you could share what you think, but I think that it's about coming to terms with our relationship with power and our own power versus projecting outward. And we always say the animus and the father archetype are very similar for women, is that we project that power externally. We're always putting our spiritual power in money, in other people, in relationships, and we get like the hunger, we're hungry for that power, but we don't know how to look within to get it, so we're looking outward. And so the first step is like notice in your life where you're giving power to things that are bigger than you. That kind of projection, that pedestal, goals that you have, that has power over you and today and who you are. And how do those things define you? And how we're trying to pull from the world. Like, I remember one time you said, it's like we cut the world in tiny pieces and we're trying to pull it all back together. You know, we're not noticing that we're connected to it all. It's all separate to us.
Yeah.
So it's basically coming to terms with the projection of power.
Yeah, but I was I was going towards the idea of the relationship kind of giving us a platform for that.
Okay.
Yeah, so you were talking about relationships and how we tend to kind of project a lot of those expectations onto the partner. And that's problematic if you're unconscious. Let's say if you're projecting all those unmet needs that you're bringing from your family experience onto the relationship and saying, now here's my chance to get fulfilled in all these things, that's too much pressure on your
like
partner.
my dad didn't give me enough attention, so you need to give me attention. You're not giving me enough attention.
That's right.
You're calling them up or texting them 40 times. And
Yes. So you're essentially straining and putting a lot of stress on the relationship to fulfill those unmet needs. That's not the function of a good relationship. In a good relationship, people are independent in themselves and whole in themselves, and then they're sharing those experiences together. Now, ideally, of course, most of the time what happens is people do a kind of individuation within relationships, right? When they say, well, here's my chance to make it work somehow, to find that internal strength to make this work, because I'm really invested in making this work. I really love this person and I want to make it work. And then they kind of, undergo some kind of individuation on their own. But I think ideally people do need more of this kind of information, kind of a coaching to help them really take advantage of the relationship as an individuation process.
well, it's really the way, like I feel like I've grown more in a relationship than when I was single, just kind of hitting a wall and kind of dealing with the same things. Like a relationship like opens you up to examine yourself in a much deeper way. Now for men, so for women, we can see the hunger, the father hunger. How does the father hunger show up with men in relationships? Like, what do they expect of the woman or their partner?
I think it would be primarily that they wouldn't trust themselves, and they wouldn't trust their emotions in the relationship to kind of be that anchor for their partner.
Would they be more like a passive husband, or
could be a passive husband, or emotionally unavailable, workaholic, maybe alcoholic, and all those things that kind of get in the way of the relationship.
So he wouldn't be basically ability to connect. Yeah. And even a strong man, if he didn't have a strong father figure, most likely, or he can go the opposite, where he's almost puts so much pressure on himself to be everything his father wasn't.
Yes.
And then you see people have heart attacks and get sick from working so much because they can't allow themselves to be the slacker father. They have to kind of compensate.
Yes.
In a way.
And
at the
again,
price of the relationship, because now that becomes kind of over. They're not even there for the other person. They're kind of dealing with their own stuff.
Yeah. We know. What we're describing right there is that intergenerational pattern, right, that plays out in families. If you're able to look at how did my parents do this, how did my grandparents do this, and back in the family tree, you'll start to see the patterns. They're there, just like eye color and hair color are, they are passed down. A lot of this psychology is passed down generation after generation. The good news is, and this is Jung's work, that we can grow beyond that.
We can break the pattern, break the chain.
Yes, if we're willing to look at those patterns, right, and examine them. And then our contribution is simply this, that instead of waiting for therapy to do this kind of work, we can do it by understanding Jung's ideas and applying them in a coaching model.
Yeah, which is probably more, individuation is more a coaching model than actually a therapy model, because therapy is really, you're just kind of coping with the past and getting to the baseline, where individuation is about going to your potential.
Yeah, and I tell you, I worked with couples as well. What happens by the time the couple gets to the point where they say we need a therapist, it's kind of late. There's been a lot of problems kind of building up to get them to that point, and it's not a good way to do it, because now you're having to deal with those issues instead of the real process of individuation.
So you're saying that everyone, once you start dating, you should do Jungian coaching, and then and when your couple, find your partner, that they should do it, because we find that too. A lot of women or men who have done our process or did our training, they meet someone and then they kind of want to bring them up to speed, because if one person understands the shadow and projection and the other person doesn't. But we find that actually what happens is that their partner, if they've done their individuation, their partner's most likely ready for it too, because we kind of resonate on that same level, and we find that appropriate partner. So the more work and I hate to say work because it's not work, it's a process of really growth, self-realization. The more realized you are, the more who you're going to match up with is going to match that level or be prepared for that level, because why would you unconsciously be drawn to someone who isn't ready?
Yeah.
Unless you're not ready.
That's right.
And so basically one of the things that the steps really of individuation is first look at that projection, look at the pattern of your father. What did you long from that relationship that you didn't feel complete with, and notice how that shows up in your relationships now. And it could show up in other relationships too, not just romantically.
Yeah.
I found that my bosses were always disappointed in me, or that was my projection. Like I always had to be follow the rules and be a really good employee. And I always felt like I didn't get enough acknowledgement, just like my father. And I projected a lot of my male bosses the same thing, or female bosses too. It's that authority. So we start to project the father archetype onto authority figures.
We project whatever pattern we received in those first 7 years. Because that's kind of the initial imprint that we received from the father. And then we kind of, if there is that lack, right, or we sense abandonment or non-support or criticism, or even intense kind of that our father was very invested in living his life or his unmet dreams through us.
Oh yeah. Then that pressure on the children, you got to be really perfect, or you got like Tiger Woods' father put all that pressure on him to be successful because he wasn't able to be that successful golfer. Yeah,
then that pattern is then played out, either with our kids or in our relationships and all that. And so the key is always, everything is pointing to us doing that internal work, right? It doesn't mean that we have to go to therapy and forgive and all that stuff, although there's nothing wrong with those things, and some people, they do need that kind of support. It's mainly that it's pointing to what is your role in all this, right? You're the one that is kind of carrying this story.
Yeah.
So you can change it. You
came up with this survival kit to navigate that as a child. You came up with your strategies. So you decided how you dealt with the outside experience, and then you can actually choose again to come up with a new strategy.
Yeah, and that process is what was traditionally called a spiritual life. It wasn't, spirituality was not just about going to church or the temple and meditating. It was that a person was whole and complete in themselves, that they understood that, I have the power to generate that story, therefore I have the power to change it. That's the human power right there, the divine power in the human being. And that accessing that power is what this life is about. In other words, all these challenges that we face, they're not simply to make us suffer. They're there to wake us up, right? So that we can develop ourselves, we can grow into this.
And so we don't want to go back and say, why did I get stuck with this father, this dynamic? And now I look back and, someone told me once that, having that father helped you seek truth. Having that complicated relationship. You didn't just get married at 20 and kind of went into the suburbs and didn't explore your mind at all or go for anything. It kind of kept me in a place of I needed to dig in and see what this is about, and turning inward versus being very externalized and comfortable in my external experience. it can also be a hindrance. And I find that my friends that had that comfortable early life, they didn't seek the growth because they didn't need to. Like, they had everything out there. And I find that it's the biggest gift is to be able to know who you are and grow and have deeper spiritual experiences and a human experience at the same time. And be able to, after 41 years of being single, finally meet someone who's loving and kind and a different relationship. And I see that happen over and over again with people we work with. The dynamic that gets set up with the partner is completely new and different. Then you're not destined to play out that pattern if you become conscious. That's the key.
Yeah, and it changes your relationship with your parents, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Because you see it in the right context. You're not projecting all that, you should have done this and that, and our culture is saturated with that idea of blame the parents, or the parents screwed you up somehow, go to therapy because you're broken somehow and you need to forgive.
Write them a letter, and angry letter. And, I have to say that I did all that stuff. And then when I realized that it was me that was not also contributing to my father being distant with me, I was holding back too. I reached out to him and I talked to him, and we started to really create a bond. And I was 40 years old finally. And when he got diagnosed with cancer, I, did energy work and hypnotherapy. And I said, hey, do you want me to try this on you? And he was like, okay. It was my old projection of my father would have been, no, he's shut down. He wouldn't be open to this. And my last moments with him before he passed, I was doing energy work on him, and he was just, kind of grounding him. And he was like, oh, I don't feel the energy here. And I'm like, you feel the energy? Like, it was so cool to have that experience with him. And I thought to myself while I was doing it that he's the last person in my whole life that I would ever think would be experiencing this with me. And it was such a beautiful, my sisters and my mother had left, and it was just me and him alone. And I just remember that day, just like, it was so special. Like, it wasn't about me healing him, or it was just that he saw me, for who I was, like who I became. And I'm getting all emotional. And I loved him for just who he was. And I just think that's how we can love more in the world, is if we can see who these people are for us, and how they're all just trying their best most of the time. And they're dealing with their own conditioning. And so it's just a beautiful moment. I'm getting all teary-eyed, but it is very powerful to be able to love someone that wonderfully. And even after having all that stuff, complex relationship, it was just a beautiful moment for me.
Yeah.
And I think we all should be open to that. And maybe, if your father has passed or you haven't had a chance to complete that, there's still a way you can work with that and create that within yourself. Like, it doesn't mean that you can't resolve that, because you're carrying that memory in you of him, and so you can change it.
Yeah. And at the archetypal level, we see, like you mentioned, it's very much connected to how we experience the universe, because the father archetype, it represents the unseen. Right, the moving spirit behind things, behind the material world, the ideas, the dynamics that
kind of trusting in the unseen helps us create in life.
Yeah.
If we only look at the concrete and the practical, we tend to be cynical about life and.
Yeah. And so it reconnects us to the bigger cosmic experience of being a human being, right? That it's not just about making our little life work, although that is a part of it, but it's also that our work is meant to contribute to the whole, to humanity, to other people. So, yeah, it's a great process. But again, we have to shift the way we approach these things. If we approach them just as pathologies, as things to push away, to fix, we're missing the bigger point, right? That no, it's a great lesson. It's an entry point into a deeper spiritual life.
Wow, powerful session. Some comments. I love this coaching program deals with emotions without judging them. Such freedom, not judging others, but seeing our own choices. What imprint would a divorced father leave on a son? My parents are still friends, but I did not have a romantic role model in my home. How do I overcome that?
Yeah, again, it's not so much about overcoming, but about examining that and approaching that, and asking yourself honestly, what assumptions does your mind make about that fact of divorce? Like if you ask, what does that mean about me that I experienced that? And kind of put yourself back in those early experiences as well. What were the emotions? Was it fear? Was it feeling lost, feeling abandoned? Whatever it was, you approach it with an open, friendly, non-judging mind. It's not about approaching good emotions and pushing away bad ones. It's simply all emotions are telling us something about our mind, something about the way we've interpreted ourselves in the world. So it gives you a lot of information as to what assumptions have you been making about your role in life and the possibility of relationships in your life. And that awareness starts to change the dynamics itself.
And then how about like a father who cheated on the mother, and then they got divorced, and the daughter's trying to now find a relationship, which she would probably have an imprint about, like a trust issue, or would you say?
Yeah, it's very personal though, because siblings.
Everyone's different.
Yeah, siblings experience the same parents, but often they take away very different lessons from those experiences. So it depends on your narrative, like how did you interpret those experiences? So you have to get at that. What was my interpretation of those experiences? It's not that that's going to do a certain thing to everyone.
Everyone, yeah. But that would be, again, so we never just look at a situation and say everyone who's had this experience. Yeah. Like if I had a father who was cold, I'm always going to be having this certain response.
Right. Because we've seen people that had pretty much an ideal family life. Yeah. And they still have to do this internal work.
And they're like, oh, they had such great parents. Like, what happened to this person? Like, you seem like, I think what's often overlooked, I think in personal growth, a lot of times we focus on the terrible parent, the critical parent, the abandoned parent, but not the high achiever parent, the one that wants everyone to be the best, and the pressure the child has to live up to that expectation. So, but everyone's different. Some people are okay being slackers. Some people need to meet that expectation, and you see that in the different siblings, like you said, in the world. And so all a projection.
And it's never too late to have a great childhood.
Yes.
Because through this work, you let go of that, a lot of those resentments, and you start to use your mind in a creative way, right? That if I'm free to reinvent my story and the way I feel myself to be in the world, what can I create, right? I can use my imagination, my talents, my skills now in a different way instead of always being tied to that narrative of the past. Well,
Father Hunger, there you have it. It's an intriguing topic. And in order for us, the bottom line is, in order for us to deal with and have healthy relationships with ourselves and others, is to deal with our projection of the father archetype, and what conditioning, what we made up about that projection, how it impacted us, and how to see through clear eyes and basically see the father or the mother figure in a more human way. Like they are imperfect, but they are trying their best most of the time with what they've been given.
Yeah, that we know for sure, that if we trade places with anyone, we'll simply play out their destiny, because we don't really have free will until we do individuation. Until we come to terms with our past history and really understand the power of our mind, we're simply acting out of past conditioning, out of that past narrative. So anyway, I hope this helps people understand a little bit more about family dynamics.
Yes.
What's on the agenda for next week?
I think we're talking about, I can't remember. Why don't I not remember? But I know we're talking about soulmates, and I think we're talking about work relationships next week, I think. So we're going to talk about work relationships, soulmates, and there was one more, but I think that's it. Yeah, I think work is next, and the soulmates.
Work and love.
Yes. So anyway, I'm so glad that you've all the comments. Thank you for joining us, and also I want to mention, please follow us on iTunes. Get all the downloads. We have tons of podcasts that you can listen to. Go back and listen to all our topics. Creative Mind Soul Sessions. Or actually, the official name is Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. If you'd like to be on our YouTube channel, we do post videos here all the time. Subscribe in the lower right-hand corner of the button here, and you'll get to be a part of our subscription and notified of all the times we're going live. And also join us in our Facebook group. We have a Facebook group community called Jungian Life Coaching with Creative Mind. So look us up, and hopefully you will join us to interact with us and watch more content and ask us questions and be able to say hello.
Yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.